is the Canmar Morning Talk Show, a fresh take on what's happening in the cannabis and psychedelic spaces. I'm your host, Melissa Jane Saidi. Join me as I sit down and have thought-provoking conversations with some of the industry's top experts and trendsetters from around the globe. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Canmar Morning Talk Show, everyone, your go-to podcast for all things cannabis, psychedelics, and hemp related. I'm your host, Melissa, and we have a fantastic guest lined up for you today. Today, we have the privilege of speaking to one of the most prominent legal minds in the cannabis industry. He's a partner at Dentons, the world's largest law firm, and an expert in all aspects of cannabis legalization and regulation. Welcome to the Canmar Morning Talk Show, Mr. Peter Homberg. Thank you so much for being here today. We're truly honored to have you on the show.
Yes, hello, Melissa. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction.
Wonderful. So Peter, the way I usually like to start the show off is just by asking our guests to just give us a little bit more about their backstory, how you ended up, of course, you're a lawyer, but how you ended up sort of moving into the cannabis space and becoming such an expert in all things cannabis related. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your backstory and what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm now for over 30 years practicing as a lawyer, and for 20 years solely companies in the so-called life sciences area, which are companies in the field of pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, medical device, and biotechnology. And I have been myself in the industry. I have been with a company which was formerly known as Boehringer Mannheim, became Roche Diagnostics back in 1999, actually, or 1997, actually, the acquisition took place. And I was the deputy head of the legal department at Roche Diagnostics for many years. Before I then joined private practice again, I joined Jones Day and built up their German and European life sciences practice, and moved then after a decade with Jones Day to Celents, which became one of our founding law firms of Dentons back in 2012 actually. So I'm heading the German life science practice here and the European cannabis group. Cannabis actually as a medicine was not really a subject matter at all back when I joined the life sciences field. We had before 2017 patients who could use cannabis for the treatment of their disease, but only with an exemption from the BfArM, which is the German FDA. That's the German authority for all kind of health and pharmaceutical questions. We had around 700 to 1,000 patients at that time who, with that exception, could actually use cannabis for their treatment. So it's not a big number at all. Taking into consideration that we are around 84 million, 83 million people here in Germany. So what is interesting and how this cannabis actually fall on my desk back in 2017 was actually that one of those patients back in 2016 won a court case before the highest administrative court in Germany. He actually having an exemption and the permission to use cannabis for the treatment of his disease also claimed that he would be allowed to grow cannabis at home for his purposes. Mm-hmm. And of course, he received what Germans are very good in, a cease and desist order immediately. He went to court. And he won in the last instance before the highest administrative court in 2016, granting him the right to really home grow cannabis for his purposes, for the treatment of his disease. So, which at that point in time really was a nightmare for the legislator. And very quickly, only a couple months later, we had a new law resolved, which was called Cannabis as a Medicine. Since March 2017, cannabis is now legal for medical purposes upon prescription, of course. It's still a narcotic, but if you go to a physician and the physician is going to prescribe cannabis for your treatment, the patient will actually get it at the pharmacy. So back in 2017, all of a sudden, as you can imagine, the cultivators, in particular those from Canada, saw Germany as a new market for medicinal cannabis and came over. And we had a very, very active, and still have a very active cannabis group within Dentons in Canada. And my colleagues called me, and was that the closest is a life sciences practice to that product then, and asked me whether I can represent the Canadian cultivators in their acquisitions here in Germany. And we started already in May 2017 with the first acquisition for Canopy Growth. I can name that because it's public domain for Canopy Growth, and they actually acquired their distributor, of course, small distributor at that point in time, their distributor, to get a foothold into the German market. So that's how actually cannabis fell on my desk. And since then, I have here a team of 8 people. We are working, I would say, currently 65% of all our work on cannabis-related matters. So not only THC-related matters, it's also CBD products, and of course, industrial hemp.
That's incredible, and what a journey. You've really got to see kind of the growth and progression of the market from the Canadian side of things to now, of course, Germany. And of course, all eyes are on Germany right now with everything happening in terms of the legalization efforts of adult use recreational cannabis in the country. I'd love for us to dive in and discuss some of the intricacies of this process of legalization. And you have had your eye on, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but the leaked first draft of the bill, which will potentially be passed, that is currently in discussion among the various echelons of the German government. And you mentioned to me before that there are over 90 pages of this draft bill. And also when we spoke, you said there's some very interesting issues there that you noticed within this kind of tomb of legislation. So are there any key points or issues you could share with us today? Maybe give us a sneak peek of some of those issues that are currently, that you find interesting on that bill.
Well, being over 30 years in business as a lawyer, I always love to look back into history. And here I would like to go back to December 2021. That was actually when the coalition agreement of the new government, which consists of the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the Free Democrats, the Liberals, actually was signed. And in that coalition agreement, there was 2 sentences, and one of those sentences was, and I may cite, "We are introducing the controlled dispensing of cannabis to adults for recreational purposes through licensed shops." So that is actually what they actually agreed on in 2021, not taking into consideration that there may be some legal hurdles which they have to overcome, and which were probably at that point in time not really obvious to them. However, in June 2022, so half a year later, the progress started, and the whole initiative to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes was initiated with an expert hearing with regard to the legalization of recreational cannabis, initiated by the drug commissioner Burkhard Blinert, who invited experts to these hearings in June 2022, and to listen to them how and in which way actually the legalization can be implemented. And then not much later, in October 2022, the Federal Minister of Health, Mr. Karl Lauterbach, presented the German government key points paper, which, not really surprisingly, demonstrated a 180 degrees turnaround of the government, which means that there was, of course, a prohibition in the focus, and the argument of the government to legalize cannabis under, of course, the government control for recreational purposes was threefold. Number one, take into consideration that we have a still significant increasing illicit market in Germany. The prohibition definitely didn't work. So the protection of the youth was one of the key factors and key arguments for that. Number two, the protection of the consumer. They wanted to actually increase the quality of the cannabis product, which, as you know, on the illicit market contains a number of mixtures which should not be in there, to say at least. And last but not least, they wanted to attack the illicit market. They wanted to really make it smaller, like Canada did back in 2019. And that was the original plan. And the legal hurdles resulted for Germany, not only as for Canada, from the UN conventions on drug trafficking, in particular the UN Convention 1961, but also the UN Conventions 1978 and 1987, but also from the Schengen Agreement. The Schengen Agreement is the basis of the European Union and is, of course, supplemented by protocols. And these protocols very clearly stated that any kind of drug, narcotic, including cannabis, is prohibited for the use, for the recreational use. So knowing that, the German government did the following. They took their position paper with the plan in which way they would like to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes and went to the European Commission. This was not a formal process. It was even kind of unusual that the government actually asked the European Commission, what do you say as Commission to our plan? And they also, of course, had an argumentation paper where they actually outlined everything with regard to what they believe is the right way for the legalization. Well, even in April 2023, Karl Lauterbach indicated, well, we had very productive talks with the European Commission. However, the position of the European Commission was relatively clear. It's a no-go. The way Germany proposed, based on their position paper from October 2022, is a no-go. If Germany would proceed, which they theoretically could, they are threatened with a respective procedure before the European Court of Justice for breaching the Schengen Agreement. So the European Commission took a very, very conservative position, which is understandable, taking into consideration that even the European Commission is a member of the 1987 UN Convention. So they would also be in breach if they would allow Germany to do that. So I was actually being asked several times, do you believe that this plan of October 2022 will come into place? And I said, well, I don't see that really. And that is actually what happened then in April 2023, despite the fact that at the beginning of April, Karl Lauterbach spoke about productive talks. In May, or at the end of April, they actually presented then a plan B, saying we are not allowed to implement what we want to do from our position paper in October 2022. We now have to do plan B. And here comes plan B.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think it kind of threw a spanner in the works, and everyone was like, okay, well now we have to kind of go back to the drawing board in a way. But there are some interesting things coming in terms of kind of this bill and the propositions. And you mentioned to me before, there are two kind of pillars of this legalization process that are under review, correct? The first, the legalization of homegrown, the cannabis clubs or cultivation clubs. And then the second, of course, the pilot projects. Maybe we can talk about the first pillar, the kind of legalization of homegrown and the cannabis clubs. How do you see that playing out in Germany? I'm very curious because I think I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out with up to 500 members potentially being allowed. I think that would bring some complications. So how do you kind of see that pillar taking shape if it is accepted?
Yeah, indeed, you're correct, Melissa. We have now a two-pillar solution, which the German government, respectively the Minister of Health and Mr. Lauterbach, together with Mr. Özdemir, actually presented. The first pillar foresees, and it's not yet implemented, so it's still a draft law.
Under review.
So it's not yet, so your listeners should not take that as, oh yeah, that's what they were going to do. It's still under discussion, but that's what they plan is. Plan B is a two-pillar solution for legalizing recreational cannabis within the boundaries of the legal framework which we have. So number one, you correctly said, it is an individual non-commercial cultivation at home allowance, which means the idea is that each adult above 18 can actually cultivate up to 3 female flowers back at home, where he actually can also consume the cannabis which he has grown. And of course, with the obligation to prevent access by minors. That is very, very clearly said. Following the idea that the youth should be protected, even if we're going a step forward into the legalization process here. And the second part of the first pillar is the implementation of, they call it cannabis clubs, that is kind of misleading. It is a cultivation association. I think that is what it is under this German Vereins structure, which means that is kind of an association which is allowed to cultivate cannabis for its members, and actually is allowed to hand up to 50 grams to each member who is older than 21 per month. So, which is a decent amount, whatever decent means. And such it's a non-profit association. I think that's important. So everybody who thought, oh, here comes a business opportunity, that is, I would say, rather limited. I've always been named as the critical voice of the cannabis industry, but I think we need to be very realistic here. The cannabis clubs, even if they have the possibility to retain 500 members, need to finance, of course, the cultivation. We all know from our clients and from the industry that this is expensive. Yeah. It is definitely not allowed to do that in an open space. So the minimum is that we have to build greenhouses which have to be also secured. And so in-house or indoor and greenhouse cultivation is probably allowed. It's not yet really clear because the draft law very generally describes what is the plan. And of course, it is left to the authorities in the various states to implement the respective rules and regulations, which still have to be worked out. So if you have 500 members, then indeed, if I calculated correctly, the cannabis club can actually be allowed to cultivate up to 300 kilograms per annum for their members, which is a size. Yeah, so you need to have at least significant greenhouse capacities in order to really accommodate that. There will be quality standards. Nobody said how they look like, whether it will be GMP or even below or only GACP. That's the question. There will be also a strict advertising ban. And those cannabis clubs have to monitor and document what they grow, how they grow, and of course to whom they actually hand out the respective cannabis. What is also important, a function of these cannabis associations or these cultivation associations is that they are allowed to provide for home grow a limited number of seats to those who actually would like to do home grow. The home growers don't need to be members of the cannabis associations, but a member can actually get the respective seeds or seedlings for those home growers. Now, if you look into the financial issues here of these cannabis associations, that is kind of how difficult to implement. There are lots of open questions right now. What is the membership fee? What are the entrance fees in order to fulfill the profitability obligation?
Absolutely. I think especially getting 500 people to kind of agree on what cannabis is even grown, right? Is another thing. So I think that it's a good kind of baseline idea, but there are a lot of things, a lot of factors that will kind of, I guess, come into question if this does get passed, of course. Because I think everyone kind of looks at it like, oh, a cannabis club, they immediately think of somewhere like Amsterdam, you know, with the coffee shops, but that's not what this is kind of going to look like at all.
That's off the table. But we come to the second pillar in a minute. But that's off the table for the first pillar. What I should add here as well is that there will be a special rule for those adults between 18 to 21. These adults can only purchase, get only 30 grams of cannabis per month. And this should have a THC content of below 10% or 10% and below. So the question of how control is going to be implemented is something which I think has to be thought through. Despite the fact that these cannabis associations and the cultivation possibilities or the cultivation area where they actually grow the cannabis needs to be away from schools. There is a certain minimal distance from kindergartens, from sports arenas, from shopping centers. And if you look into the map of Berlin, for example, it may be difficult to find a space within Berlin, take into consideration that we have a great number of schools and a great number of kindergartens and a great number of sports arenas and shopping centers, really to cultivate within the city. So the question is not yet solved whether the cultivation site has to be in the proximity of the seat of the cultivation association, yes or no, something which needs to be discussed. So it sounds theoretically quite nice. To implement that on a practical side, well, will definitely see some obstacles here.
Absolutely, yeah, yes, absolutely. I think that you hit the nail on the head there, Peter, by saying, you know, in theory it sounds great, but there are so many factors that need to be considered. But moving on to the second pillar, and this is similar to what we're seeing in Switzerland right now, the scientific pilot projects. And I know that, so this is something you mentioned before, it's actually your personal preference moving forward, maybe a little bit easier to control than what we just spoke about. So could you talk a little bit about how the pilot projects could play out for Germany specifically and how they might compare with or differ to those in Switzerland?
Yeah, so this second pillar indeed refers to this scientifically controlled pilot projects, which when you asked me back in 2022 would have been my favorite solution as a plan B, because if the European Commission, as they did, not agrees to the legalization process as originally thought at. So that means that cultivation, distribution, and to a certain extent use of cannabis for recreational purposes would be under the control of the government. It will, of course, be closely monitored what kind of impact the use of recreational cannabis has in various aspects with regard to health conditions, with regard to general impact on society. And there would be a period of 4 years where this whole project will be monitored. Because we still have, I think, a lack of knowledge about how would a legalization of recreational cannabis really have an impact in general. Of course, we can have a look at Canada, how it worked there since 2019, and can learn from those.
But there's two completely different countries, and that's another thing that's very interesting, because it's not a one size fits all approach, right?
Yeah. So it is not yet clear how this will be implemented. There is no draft law created yet. It's just the plan that this is going to happen. How it will be rolled out, which areas, which cities, which regions are going to apply to be involved in that project is not yet clear. The project will be very much like the one which we have seen in Switzerland. Where already at the beginning of this year, Basel and Zurich implemented the respective projects, and they're already up and running. Of course, Germany is much larger, and we still have different states with different governments and different political colors. So we'll see how this whole work out, even in the process of implementing now this law, which is still a draft law for the first pillar and then for the second pillar. So we will definitely have an interesting time. Well, mid of July, the respective parliament holidays are going to start, and we won't see anything happening before September. What is going to happen before before the mid of July, we will see. So if we look into that, I think what is worthwhile to mention that the whole idea of the legalization with this two-pillar model also goes along with the decriminalization of cannabis, its possession. There will be, of course, certain rules for consumption, but there will be new criminal provisions because the plan is to take, and that's important also for the medical market, to take cannabis out of the Narcotics Act, the German Narcotics Act, with the very stringent offenses and punishments if you are going to violate that. So cannabis, THC and cannabis will be taken out, that's the plan, out of the narcotics law in Germany, and all provisions with regard to cannabis, not to other drugs, but with regard to cannabis, will be implemented into that new law, the new cannabis law. That is something which has an impact. Of course, we are going forward in the decriminalization process, which is, I think, important. It's probably a very good step forward. However, the question of the implementing of the respective offenses is kind of still open to a certain extent, at least, and whether this will be agreeable to not only the parliament, where the government has the majority, but also to the so-called second chamber, the Bundesrat, and whether the Bundesrat needs to be involved in the lawmaking process here is also still under discussion. So interesting times. Towards the first steps of legalization here in Germany.
Amazing. And yeah, I think it's incredible because we're really getting to see a really large country like Germany and how the kind of legalization process is working out for the country, because I think that these things kind of create a knock-on effect, right? Especially for the rest of Europe. You mentioned the Czech Republic early on before we started recording, and that's something that's moving forward as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on that and kind of how what is happening in Germany right now will have a knock-on effect for the rest of Europe.
We have, or the German government has been supported by some other governments of member states of the European Union, and the Czech Republic was one of those. And they may take even a more aggressive approach by saying we will implement the legalization as Germany originally actually thought it could be, and then we will fight that before the European Court of Justice, and then we see how this will work out. We'll see whether this is a route which they may or may not go, and take into consideration the formal decisions of the European Court of Justice with regard to cannabis and the prohibition, they are very, very more on the conservative side. So it will be interesting to see whether the Czech Republic is doing that. Germany won't. But there are other countries within the European Union which very much would like to see a more legalized way of the use of cannabis for recreational purposes. And we are still, I would say, behind other states in the US, for example, within Europe, where even medical cannabis is not allowed to that extent as we have it in Germany. Everybody thought it might have a pulling effect on other European member states, but it didn't. Not to that extent. We have, of course, the possibilities for some patients with certain indications to use cannabis in other European countries, but it's not as broadly developed for patients as we have it in Germany. So that is also an issue which needs to be driven forward, because my personal belief is, and I share that with a number of physicians, that cannabis under certain circumstances, in particular for certain diseases, is a good addition or even replacement of the drugs which patients with significant side effects may have to take today. And I'm looking into chronic pain, for example, which is a very important indication for the use of cannabis products, be it extracts or flowers. Still, the German physicians are very reluctant, to a certain extent at least, to prescribe cannabis. But it needs education, and the cannabis industry on the medical side is going forward to do that. And we hope that we will get more and more physicians to look into that and to decide whether it would be good for their patients to use cannabis, or at least try it out, in particular for those patients which are significantly suffering.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really excellent point, Pete. And I think that's something that's lacking across the board globally for the industry is education, not only for the public, of course, but like you said, for physicians, for doctors, for everyone. So I think that is definitely something that needs to be kind of pushed a little bit further. And, you know, just on this whole topic of Europe, and because you're the chairman of the board of the European Cannabis Association, and you're really tuned into all of these things, is there anything else that the Cannabis Association is doing? Is there anything in terms of education, or maybe you could just talk a little bit more about what it is that you guys are doing at the European Cannabis Association?
The ECA, the European Cannabis Association, was established by me and two colleagues, and following a resolution of the European Parliament back in 2019, asking the European Commission to initiate the drafting of a European directive, which is going to harmonize all the different provisions for the use of medical cannabis within the European Union. We looked at that. It was actually celebrated by the trade press. Yes, we're going forward, but sometimes it's worthwhile to read a little bit more in detail and have a deep dive into what has the European Parliament actually proposed. And having a look at the various points, some of them were to a certain extent at least questionable, and whether this would be for the positive for the cannabis industry for medical purposes in Europe. For example, it contained a proposal that only cannabis products having a marketing authorization can be put on the market, can be distributed to patients, which today is not the case, not in Germany at least. And of course, we have products on the market containing THC, like Sativex, which has a marketing authorization, but all the current flowers and extracts are not considered a finished pharmaceutical, but rather an extemporaneous mixture, which the pharmacist has to prepare for the specific patient, following specific instructions on the prescription. And as such, these products do not need marketing authorization. And we all know marketing authorization for a pharmaceutical product is not only costly, it takes significant time. And also taking into consideration that cannabis has a very individual impact on each patient. So it very much depends on a number of facts. Which patient reacts positively to what kind of THC content and CBD content for his specific indication. It may be difficult to set up a clinical trial with respective endpoints, which would be then positively concluded. So that is the danger here. And that's the reason why my colleagues and I said, well, we have to lobby for the medical cannabis industry in Brussels. We incorporated the European Cannabis Association in Brussels, which is now representing a good number of members before the European Commission and the various directorates, as they call it, who are in the process to harmonize in the pharmaceutical field. And as such, we actually last year produced a white paper, position paper, as you may say, which was countering the resolution and proposing other terms and conditions which we see being necessary to be implemented into a European-wide directive released by the European Commission. And we are still waiting for significant feedback here. We filed that earlier this year. And they are obviously working. We know that the European Commission is looking into that, in particular with regard to the harmonization, because we have totally different legal environments for medical cannabis in the various European member states. This needs definitely harmonization within these 28 member states.
And I think that's a very good point. I think that harmonization is very important. And do you foresee that happening? Do you think that's something that can be kind of agreed upon? And do you think that there is kind of a future in which there is kind of harmonization across the board for kind of a global industry? And maybe not entirely, but some harmonization there, especially if people are kind of trading on a global level, right?
Yes, I have a strong belief that we need such harmonization. The Parliament, the European Parliament in 2019 actually asked the European Commission to start a respective process. So I believe that we earlier or later, probably later than earlier, will get such a unified, harmonized directive with regard to the use of cannabis as a medicine. But I'm skeptical that we will see that within the next 2 years, to be very frank.
Yeah, it does seem like things are taking a little bit longer. And I think that's just something that we kind of have to expect and accept, right? Because these things are not happening overnight, and we're learning new things each day. So I think that patience is a virtue, right?
Indeed, yes. But when speaking to physicians, you can see the uncertainty, the lack of knowledge, how to use cannabis products, be it extracts or flowers, for the treatment of their patients. It's still a narcotic under German law, and physicians are always very, very cautious with regard to the prescription of a narcotic. As such, I think it's very, very necessary that the German physicians will learn, for example, from the experience of their colleagues in Canada. Canada is so much further away in its development, and we are still, I would say, 4 to 5 years behind Canada. As such, I think we can definitely, and our physician can definitely learn from the experience of the cannabis clinics, for example, in Canada, from the experience of doctors who are treating a great number of patients with cannabis. Before the pandemic, we had a very interesting seminar organized by Dentons here in Berlin, where we invited Canadian physicians to present their experience to German doctors. And it was really, I would say, an eye-opener for the German physicians, how and in which way cannabis can be used for medical purposes, for various indications, for helping patients to have a better life.
And that's fantastic, and it goes back to that, right, to that education piece, and that's so important. And I think that's really wonderful, because people just don't have access to some of this information, and as soon as they hear something different or see the evidence that it's working, for example, as you mentioned in Canada, then it kind of changes that perception. So I think that's really great. And talking a little bit about kind of events as well, talking about, of course, we're warming up to ICBC Berlin, which is coming up very soon. I think it will be probably one of the biggest ones yet, with everything happening in Germany with legalization. I was fortunate enough to attend last year. What an incredible event, really. And you've obviously been attending and speaking at ICBC for a long time. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about what your experience has been like with ICBC in the past, and kind of what you predict for this year's event and what you're looking forward to as well.
Yeah, ICBC has been very nicely developed over the last couple of years. Well, not of course counting the pandemic pause, but the ICBC, when I first visited, I think it was back in 2017, 2018, was a relatively, I would say, small event in one of the smaller hotels here in Berlin. And since then, the ICBC has been very nicely developed. It's really becoming a very important conference for the industry. We have seen significant increase in industrial exhibitors, not only cultivators, but also those who provide services, who are providing equipment for the cannabis industry. And it is becoming really a commercial-driven trade show by companies. Commercial means in this case that the industry has now the possibility to freely present themselves, talk to each other about developments, and see how they can work together in various fields. And that is, even with the great number of exhibitors, a wonderful development. I really congratulate Alex Rogers on that development, which he actually has started back in I don't know when ICBC was first in Berlin, but it might be 2016, 2017 maybe.
Yeah, I think I'm actually not 100% sure of the exact date, but I think you're I think you're right there. I think it must be 2016, 2017, around there.
And since then, it has been growing. It has become really a trade show. It has become a platform for the industry, and you can find actually a great number of the European players in the medical market here, but also companies and exhibitors from abroad who see the potential in the European market. It's not a German show, it's really a European show. It's a platform for the European cannabis industry. And I can only invite those who are working in this industry to come to Berlin and see this wonderful show. Which, of course, and I think that's worthwhile to mention, is also the platform for exchanging ideas regarding the future regulatory environment, changing also ideas about where do we see investment possibilities, even under this, I would say, two-pillar model for the legalization, which is less than what actually everybody expected back in 2022. It provides opportunities for certain industries, and this is something which definitely will be discussed also during ICBC. And it's a great gathering. It's more than a big family right now.
absolutely. I mean, I had an absolute blast attending last year. It really is a very special event that Alex and his team has put together, you are so right. It also has that very international kind of feel. It truly is an international event. There really are players from all around the world, and it just makes it so interesting because it's really a sharing experience. Everyone is sharing knowledge and wanting to grow together, which I think is really something special. And of course, Peter, you will be the keynote speaker, correct, at this year's event. So I'd love to know if you could give us a little sneak peek at what you might be talking about during your keynote speech this year. What do people have to look forward to?
Yes, well, thank you for giving me that opportunity, but it will be only sneaking in a little.
Of course, we don't want to give everything away.
No, it will be probably twofold. First of all, I would definitely present the current medical cannabis market in Germany and in Europe, see where there is the opportunity for further developments. What do we see happening in this area? Even take into consideration that there will be a legalization for at least a limited legalization for recreational cannabis, what kind of impact this may have. But I think the main topic will be also how will legalization in Germany go forward. We may know a little bit more about the status of the review of the current draft law, and then we may have an inside look what the government is going to plan for the implementation of that. So a little bit more information about how does the Cannabis Cultivation Association look like, how it may be controlled, what are the respective measurements to protect the youth, and of course also to keep up the quality of the products which are handed over to the members of those, I call it cannabis clubs, which are not really clubs. And that is something I think which the industry is also expecting to give a real deep dive insight with a critical voice within that industry, because lots of people see always great opportunities. Yes, they are there. There are opportunities, but they may not be as great as everybody would like to see it. And that is something which I did already last year, critically look into what is going to happen. 1 year later, we are a few steps further down the road for the legalization, but we'll see. I will give an outlook what is going to happen.
So, and you heard it here, guys, the sneak peek. You don't want to miss out on Peter's speech at ICBC this year. And tickets are on sale now. The event is taking place on the 29th and 30th of June. Register now on their website, internationalcbc.com. And I'm sure it's going to be an absolutely incredible event. I'm very sad I won't be making it this year, but I'll be there in spirit for sure.
Very good, Melissa.
So Peter, as we kind of start to wrap things up here today, maybe you can just give everyone just a little bit, to circle back to Dentons a little bit now. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you and your Dentons team could assist businesses or individuals in the cannabis space, and how interested parties can get in touch if they want to know more.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me point out that within Dentons, we are not only the largest global law firm, but we have really groups of lawyers who are working with the cannabis industry. In Canada, in the US, my colleague Eric Berlin, who is heading the US cannabis group within Dentons, will be coming to the ICBC as well. And of course, in some other areas of the world, but also, and this is important, within Europe. These groups are very closely working together. We are exchanging information regarding the news developments on a constant basis. And since we have established this European cannabis group within Dentons, which I am heading, we are advising a great number of clients. As I said, we are working currently 65% with my eight people team here on cannabis issues in the fields of Regulatory, very important, because the regulatory environment is changing steadily. Actually, with every month I could publish some new developments.
That's very true.
Number two, of course, also we currently see kind of consolidation in the market for medical cannabis in Germany. So we're doing, of course, M&A transactions, financing transactions, which we help companies to get together with investors and get the right investment for their further development. And not to forget all the commercial agreements which we are creating, which we are drafting for our clients in that field, like offtake agreements and supply agreements and other agreements, which are necessary for that industry.
Amazing. And yeah, and you know, I think that's very important. And I think it's some people, especially if they're just getting into the industry or starting a business, they don't realize how many regulatory hurdles there are, and things that need to be followed, boxes that need to be checked. So this is where you guys can help and where you specialize in. So I think that's really important, and that's really incredible. And Peter, just in terms of the future, of course, we know things are unpredictable. You know that, I know that, we've seen that. But are there any predictions? Well, maybe predictions are the wrong words to make, especially in this industry, but maybe some hopes of where you would like to see things going and how you kind of do think that things will progress over the next few months. As you said, there are a lot of kind of things up in the air, but just from your personal kind of outlook on this.
Yes, let me take my crystal ball here and have a look. It has not, it has sometimes very clearly become reality, what I've seen in the future. What I definitely foresee is that we will have a type of legalization for recreational cannabis in Germany. How, in which way, and whether the plans which the current government has will be implemented one-to-one is difficult to foresee. I believe that there will be lots of discussion going on, and this will probably not be implemented before the year 2024. So you should not count on getting the first recreational cannabis in Germany this year. I think that is clear. And whether it's the end of 2024 or more in the last quarter of 2024 or third quarter is difficult to foresee. But that's what I see realistically going to happen. The medical market will further develop. Of course, we have a great number of self-payers who may actually move over to the recreational market once it has been established. But the impact will not be as significantly as we have seen that in Canada because of the difference in our healthcare system, because of the reimbursement policy which we have for patients using medical cannabis for the treatment of their disease. And as such, that is still a growing, I would say constantly growing market. We have still not reached sufficient numbers of physicians to really get comfortable with the prescription of cannabis. That is the task which we have to really take on. And for, as I said, for the good of the patients who may use the cannabis as an alternative or even for a replacement of their current pharmaceuticals. So in a nutshell, I think it's still developing. We will see further developments in other European countries as well. So it's an increasing market, maybe slower than originally expected back in 2017. But the medical market will grow, and we'll see how the recreational market will actually be developed in the years to come.
Absolutely, you know, and I think, you know, that's a very good point. Maybe things are not happening. I think we always want things to happen right away, right? Everyone wants this to happen, but we have to kind of just be patient and realize it takes some time. But at the end of the day, things are moving in the right direction, right?
Yes, I believe so, and that's good. That is going to do that. We will probably see also on the UN level some further discussions regarding cannabis. Which the WHO may actually again initiate. We will definitely see some more discussions within the European member states with regard to cannabis, not only as medicine, but also for recreational purposes. So it will develop over time. I'm very positive, but it will go probably slower than everybody wants it.
Of course. So Peter, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining me here on the Canmar Morning Talk Show today. It was really great to have you here. A lot of really interesting insights that you shared with us, so thank you. And we're looking forward to see where things go for Germany in the future. Any final thoughts or anything else you would like to add before we wrap things up here today, Peter?
Well, as I said, we will have positive developments in that great marketplace of Europe for cannabis, for CBD. We will definitely see more CBD products, and there are thoughts about further relaxation of this stringent legal environment here as well. So I would say stay tuned and listen to what the European Commission may say. Just recently, they actually decided that certain products will be allowed. So we'll see how this will work out.
Watch the space.
Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks for being here. It was great talking to you, and I know you have a hard stop now, so thanks for being here, and I'm looking forward to see what happens next. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching or listening to the Canmar Morning Talk Show. Join us next time for your weekly dose of cannabis and psychedelics updates from the industry's experts. But before you go, don't forget that at Canmar we specialize in recruitment and licensing and compliance for highly regulated industries such as cannabis, hemp, and psychedelics. Visit us at canmar.io to book a free consultation with one of our specialists today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button to hear more juicy insights from the movers and shakers of the cannabis and psychedelics industry.